question. I just have to say that out of all the episodes we've recorded, this 2-part live recording on the main stage at the AFWA Women Who Count conference was absolutely my favorite so far.
Me too. Seeing all of those faces in the audience and hearing from women who've been directly impacted by sexual harassment, and then working with Kami and Julie, such incredible experts on the topic, it was really everything that I hoped it would be.
Well, major credit to you for coming up with this crazy idea.
Aw, thanks, Nance. For listeners who have no clue what we're talking about, we found an employment attorney, Kami Hoskins, and an HR expert, Julie Thiel, and invited them on stage to discuss sexual harassment in accounting from the perspective of employees, employers, and even small business owners and their own clients.
It was a 2 CPE session at Women Who Count, and so we've split it into 2 podcast episodes. You're going to have to come back on January 14th for part 2.
Remember, you can go to earmark.app to earn CPE credit.
And please follow the She Counts podcast on LinkedIn to join the conversation. Y'all, we are so glad you are here. This begins the live recording of the She Counts podcast. Right. Take it away, Question.
Welcome to She Counts, the Real Talk podcast for women in accounting. We're your hosts, Questian
and Nancy McClelland.
And every episode, we're digging into the real experiences, challenges, and unspoken truths of life in this profession.
Because if you've ever felt like you're the only one, you're not. And you shouldn't have to figure it out alone.
Special thank you to our Season 2 sponsors, Forwardly, Relay, and Client Hub.
Speaking of Forwardly, did everyone have an amazing time at their 80s party last night with PathQuest? Make some noise! We're so grateful to Forwardly and the rest of our sponsors for helping us bring these conversations to life, enabling us to share out loud what everyone's thinking, but no one's saying. Learn more about them on our sponsors page at shecounts.show.
Today's episode is called Sex in the Workplace, Changing the Culture, Not Just the Policy. And we're recording live at the Women Who Count conference in Mesa, Arizona, on the main stage with a room full of incredible women. Let's hear it.
And a few guys. A few incredible guys, too. Yeah, we're so excited to be doing this.
Yes, and we have 2 very special guests with us. Kami Hoskins here. Say hello to Kami.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here.
And Julie Thiel. Did I say your last name right?
It's Thiel.
Thiel. Okay, yeah. Sorry about that. I should have asked that ahead
Hi, everybody. Julie Thiel.
Kami is an employment attorney who helps organizations navigate complex workplace issues with clarity and accountability. She advises employers on policies, investigations, and compliance, and represents them before agencies such as the EEOC and NLRB. Known for her practical, people-focused approach, Kami also leads training for HR professionals and managers on preventing harassment and creating respectful, inclusive workplaces.
Julie helps professional services firms turn high turnover into high retention. With 30-plus years in HR leadership, she's developed a practical framework that reduces costly churn in accounting, engineering, and IT. Blending emotional intelligence with proven retention strategies, Julie delivers immediately actionable solutions. She's a seasoned speaker for organizations like AFWA Minnesota, the Dakota County Chamber, and the University of Minnesota's Carlson School of Business. And she's known for her relatable style, which we can attest to, and insights that turn retention challenges into strategic advantages.
As you know, we love launching each episode with a story, but before we get there, we have a few really important things to share with all of you here in the room and our audiences at home. Some sensitive stories may be shared, so this is a trigger warning. And we want to make sure that everybody knows that there are resources available. When we say you're not alone, we really mean it. The National Sexual Assault Hotline is 1-800-656-4673. The National Domestic Violence Hotline, 1-800-799-7233. And the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, you can just call 988 or chat with them online at chat.988lifeline.org. You may also be able to find mental health resources through your employer. Kami, I know you have a disclaimer that you would like to share with us.
Well, I wouldn't be a lawyer if I didn't have a disclaimer. So just have to say, really happy to be here. I'm happy to give some insights about the law behind these issues, but of course I'm not your lawyer and I can't create the attorney-client relationship through this discussion. If you do want to talk to me after this event here today or after you hear the podcast, just reach out.
And Julie, you had something you wanted to add.
Yeah, my experience I'm going to be sharing with you is a combination of my own experiences and of those through my colleagues. And so the thing I don't want to do, I'm going to be very general in the things I have to say. So if you try to figure out which company I worked at where that happened, you're not going to be able to figure it out. So I just want to make sure that that is absolutely clear, that I am being very generic and general in my comments on purpose. So.
Question, would you like to share the poll results
Yes,
from
that's
our
right.
Mentimeter
Yes.
word cloud?
And-
Now, for the audience at home, we had the participants who are live here at the Women Who Count conference, the AFWA Women Who Count conference. We had them, when they came in, they scanned a QR code, and they wrote 1 to 2 words to respond to this. If you've experienced or witnessed sexual harassment in your current role, how would you feel about speaking up? And uncomfortable was definitely the biggest one on here. You know what? Blake, can you take a picture of this word cloud if you haven't yet? And I'm going to actually link to it in the show notes.
Yeah,
I think that would
that's a
be a
great
really good.
idea.
And then our audience at home can see uncomfortable, scared, hesitant, nervous. Now, we also have some people who said confident, and there are some people who said empowered. And so there are some people, this is not all negative. There's a lot of words on there where people are like, yeah, I work somewhere where I could handle this.
Yeah, I want to talk to whoever said confident after. I want to understand what is happening in your workplace culture that makes you feel confident, and we're going to go into some of that throughout the show in reporting sexual harassment if you've witnessed it or experienced it yourself. I want to ask our guests and Nancy as well, what do you think that these answers say about where we're at culturally in our firms with sexual harassment and reporting?
Yeah, Julie, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I think I would say, I would hope that one of the things that you walk out of after this conversation we're about to have today is an increase in confidence. And we're going to try to demystify a little bit of the process. So hopefully that will be helpful, because I think it is a little bit of a if I go talk to HR, what happens? And we're gonna talk about that. So I think we're hitting on a really important piece of the blocks that are creating that emotion and that fear when it comes to reporting these. So
And
that'll
Kami?
be good.
Yeah, so the largest word on the screen that I see is uncomfortable. So I think to me that presents opportunity to help make that word smaller and create spaces where we feel more comfortable and can identify strategies to address this type of behavior. But I'm loving the variety of descriptions about how many of you do feel empowered and understand how to interrupt these kinds of situations. So while there's work to be done, it sounds like there's already a lot of good work out there.
And then I really love the empathy and the responsibility that I'm seeing on here. Those were not words that I expected to see up here, but the idea that if somebody saw it happening, that they would feel empathetic and that they would feel a responsibility to report it, I find that very encouraging.
Yeah, I agree. So let me move forward. Oops.
So we want, as I was saying before, we always like to start the podcast off with a story. And Julie, you have a really great one.
I do. I mean, I think this is really, I want you to know that we're all in the same boat when it comes to this topic. So I have my undergraduate degree in psychology. I got my master's degree in human resources. Like, I know all the law. I know all the application. I've done investigations. I've done training. I've led training on these topics. And I still found myself in a position where I was super uncomfortable. So earlier in my career, I was a generalist at an organization, which you're not going to figure out which one it is, but there was a retiree that would come in and just visit. I don't know what he was doing, something for the company as a retiree. And he would always, he always had to walk past my office to do whatever he needed to do. And he's like, Julie, can I get a hug? And I'd be like, sure. And then what started to happen is I realized, and he wasn't coming in a lot, but every time he did, he was sure to stop by my office and ask for a hug. And I found myself going along, and then what I realized is that anytime I saw him coming into the building, I would start going the other way. And I was like, what is going on here? It's like, so me, myself, knowing everything I know, I found myself in a position, I'm like, I am uncomfortable hugging him. I don't think I want to hug him anymore. And so again, fortunately I have the background I do. So I knew that the next time he came in, he's like, Julie, can I have a hug? I said, I'm sorry, I'm not comfortable with that, but it's good to see you. It was like, kind of still,
What was it like when you caught yourself in that moment being like, oh my gosh, I'm an HR expert who deals with this all the time, and I didn't catch that until
Exactly.
you did.
And I think that's the big point here is that I think it's like, we're not always, like, in the moment, sometimes you respond or laugh along or smile about something or go along with something, and then realize afterwards that, oh, maybe that wasn't okay. Like, so it happens to all of us. So I just want to make sure that as we go into this is a very non-judgmental space. It's like, because I know I've been there where I looked at something and said, why did I keep hugging him for so long? I should have not done that, and
I think as women, we're so conditioned to do that. Like you said, to smile and laugh it off, and to not recognize that that's something that really is making us uncomfortable, and to act on it to prevent it from happening.
That's right.
I'm stunned because just now, in listening to this story and in hearing what you're saying, it happened to me earlier today. Somebody said something really inappropriate that was related to the fact that we were going to be talking about this topic on the stage. And I laughed. And I'm going back into my head. No,
Okay.
I'd rather not do that. But it was inappropriate. And I'm going to go back to that person and I'm going to say, hey, you know what? I shouldn't have laughed there because that was a really good opportunity for me to teach you that it's not okay to say things like that.
Yeah.
So, but I did not catch it until I just heard them talking about it. Like, we're so used to smiling and laughing and just keeping things oiled and moving and
De-escalating.
Yeah.
We're trained to de-escalate and, to overlook things that bother us in order to do so.
And everybody's comfortable, like what they're comfortable with is different. I mean, I'm sure there was somebody that would have been like, no big deal, I'm happy to hug him, not a big deal. But for me, I had to pay attention to that kind of inner pause that was like, I don't think that's what I want to do. And that's fine. You can realize that, like you're saying, after the action, and then take action to correct it.
It's not too late, yeah.
And this stuff takes practice. So it's not a muscle that we're going to have overnight. And the more you do it, the stronger your muscle gets and the easier it gets. So like a little grace and forgiveness of ourselves if we sometimes laugh because we felt unsafe or needed to de-escalate a situation, that's okay. Just keep practicing those and interrupting at that lower level of like just the laughter or just a grimace on your face, that helps you get stronger for the next level of interrupting these sorts of behaviors.
Yeah.
Now, question, you're going to share with us another story, which
Yes.
was sent in by a listener.
Yes, so recently when we were preparing to speak to all of you about this, we asked for listeners to share stories with us about situations that involved sexual harassment. And one of the stories that we received was from a woman who was working at a larger accounting firm, and she shared in her situation, she was in a beginning role, I would say. And her supervisor at the time would continually ask her and make advances to her to have lunch, to have dinner, and then it escalated beyond that to begging her to go out with him and to spend time with him outside of work, And that particular firm eventually went through layoffs. And during that process, he very blatantly said to her, I have feelings for you. I want you to go out with me. I want to date you. And then in the same conversation transition to, I can help make sure that you don't get laid off from this role.
Wow.
So
that is a very different kind of sexual harassment than what Julie shared with us.
Right.
I mean, I guess the story that you just shared, for me, that's like, oh, that's what sexual harassment is, right? I don't know that I would have heard Julie's story and thought that's sexual harassment, right? But they're different, they're very different types. And it's a spectrum, and there are so many different ways there's so many different stories, and every story is going to have a different, I feel like this just stopped working.
I mean, you're pretty loud. You can probably do it. I'm just kidding.
Thank you so much, Julie. I am very loud, it's true. Well, so let's go to the next Mentimeter.
Yes, so we're going to talk about that spectrum in just a minute, but I wanted to throw out a few more questions. So have you dealt with sexual harassment or know someone who has? So just take a couple of minutes to answer that. I didn't put the QR code up on the screen because it blocked all of it blocked a lot of the words. So I know that.
So
some of you
same
are having
QR
to go back
code
to,
as before.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it should. That's correct. Yeah, it should automatically. If you're on the website, it should automatically update. And so for people listening, we have asked a Menti question or a poll question. Have you dealt with sexual harassment or know someone who has? And right now, our numbers are 44%. I have personally experienced it. 31%. I know someone who has experienced it. And 21%. I have not experienced it and don't know anyone who has. That's actually kind of reassuring. That number is kind of going up to 23.
I think this is working again. Is it working now? Yes, wonderful. I love this question because it's so straightforward. Have you dealt with sexual harassment or know someone who has? Because it reminds me of the Me Too movement, the hashtag Me Too.
Yeah.
Because look at this. I mean, we've only got 20% of the women in this room. And for those of you listening to this podcast, we have a huge turnout here. We've got definitely over 100 people in the room, possibly more. And only 20% have not experienced it and don't know anyone who has. So that is very significant.
Okay, I'm going to move back to, I have a slide with some data as well. And for those listening, 37% of women report experiencing sexual harassment, and that is according to Women in the Workplace in 2024.
And
So-
ours was closer to 50%.
Yeah, I think so.
I don't know if that's an accounting thing or if that's just the people self-selecting to be in this session here or what, but yeah.
I don't know how many people they surveyed, but I imagine it's probably a much larger, much larger group. So I think that the data that we're looking at and the stories that we're hearing show that it's still happening, it's still too pervasive, and that there's a wide spectrum of sexual harassment. So it can be being uncomfortable with being hugged in this situation. It could be as awful as having your job pretty much blatantly threatened if you don't behave in a manner that is uncomfortable to you and gives them what they want. And I want to go to Kami and ask you if you can explain. We were talking about when we were preparing for the session that there are a couple different types of sexual harassment, and if you can talk about what those types of sexual harassment are, and then give us some examples.
Sure. So we've sort of been using the terminology sexual harassment to talk about behaviors, but there are actually claims under the law that are considered what we would call sexual harassment claims. And really the underlying thing to think about, I do a lot of training for employers and employees around sexual harassment prevention, discrimination prevention, and the word I really hope everybody takes away is unwelcome. Is the behavior unwelcome? And if it's unwelcome, it's probably a problem. And what is it like? What sort of protections are available to the individual depends on the severity or the nature of the behavior. So it's important, I think, for folks to understand there's the level of the law, which I'll talk about in a second, but employers also have policies. And if there could be behavior that violates a policy, which could lead to some sort of disciplinary action, but it might not give rise to a legal claim. It doesn't mean we should keep it to ourselves. We should still share that information and give our employer the opportunity to correct the behavior, but it might not give rise to these claims. So let's talk about the claims. So there's two buckets, and it's really interesting. The stories you shared actually illustrate them very well. So the story you shared is an example of what's called quid pro quo harassment, which is Latin, which means something for something. And that's when a person in a supervisory capacity conditions a part of our employment on being subjected to sexual harassment or discrimination. So you give me this benefit of going out with me and being my romantic interest, and I will keep you from being fired. That's quid pro quo. If an employee is able to prove that, it's a pretty low bar. The law is very low tolerance for quid pro quo harassment. And it's that dynamic, that power dynamic between the supervisor and the employee that's really so problematic. Because how do you say no and resist in a situation like that? The other kind is called hostile work environment, and that's what your story illustrates, and that's where the behavior is so severe and pervasive that it impacts our working environment, and so I can no longer show up and be my full self, and I'm distracted and disengaged, it's affecting my work. That's a really high bar, severe and pervasive. It's really kind of hard to get to that level, and the courts will look at both the perspective of the person who's been impacted and what a reasonable person might think about the situation. So that's sort of the framework that's applied. But again, that's legal analysis. I think a lot of employers would prefer to stop it much lower.
I'm glad you brought that up, the employers wishing we would kind of stop down here. But many of us struggle to tell when something crosses from uncomfortable to actionable. And I want to make it clear, not just for our listeners, but for everyone in this room here, we're talking about this from both the perspective of employees and employers. I run my own firm, and I know many of you do as well. So as employees and as employers, how can we recognize that line from uncomfortable to actionable before it's too late? And then what steps should they take once they realize it's been crossed?
So I like to think that we don't have to guess. So if an employee comes forward and says this behavior is unwelcome and it's making me uncomfortable, I think the opportunity is now presented to the employer to do something about it. So to engage in a prompt and thorough investigation about the allegations that the employee is bringing forward. Sorry, I'm talking like a lawyer, but but those are important words. So it needs to be prompt, it needs to be thorough. But and then the result of the investigation will let the employer know kind of what to do next, like the remedial measures, the steps they can take to correct it. But from the employee's perspective, if it is affecting you, if it's unwelcome, if it's made you uncomfortable, I highly recommend you share that information and not keep it to yourself. And
so would you argue that if you feel uncomfortable, always say something?
I think always say something to me is I leave it up to the individual to do what's right for themselves. Because there could be times when we don't feel safe or safety is literally at risk. There could be other factors that would encourage somebody to hold it in. But if you do have the capacity to share, I recommend sharing. And there's lots of different people that can receive a report of harassment in your workplace. It can be your supervisor, it can be any other supervisor, it can be HR. It doesn't have to be the person that's doing the harassment. I would encourage you to reach out for help. Always, I don't know, there are other factors that made us.
I think that's where that self-reflection of am I feeling uncomfortable or not? I think that's just a question you have to ask yourself and kind of read internally because, another example, a woman and her coworker, male and female, were texting. They were texting, after work. They were texting a little bit on the weekends. They were friends. And then at some point, he started to text more and want to try to see her. So it went from fine Do you know what I mean? It went from, like, we make friends at work, right? I mean,
So it
you're
started out
working-
okay, and then it transitioned into a
exactly.
place that,
And I
where
think
she was
that's,
uncomfortable.
as I was talking to her, that's what she was struggling with. She felt kind of guilty. She felt kind of bad. It's like, well, I've been this person's friend, and now I am uncomfortable. And so it is one of those, like, it is hard to say, well, what was that line? I don't know. Like, so, but it just part of what I was like, well, you're uncomfortable, let's address it. And we work together through an investigation, which I know we'll talk about next, but to address that. So
Yeah, and that is actually where we are going next. Can you walk us through what typically happens once a complaint lands on your desk? So what gets documented, who gets involved, and how do you decide what actions to take?
Absolutely. So let me take you behind the scenes. So when someone comes to talk to me and tells me their concern, what I am doing, first of all, is, again, I am empathizing for sure, because it's like, it's really hard for someone. It is hard to come forward. I understand the effort and the heartache that takes to come forward with a kind of a personal complaint like that or concern. So and then what we'll do is I start to ask a lot of factual questions. So, and that is a lot of what I'm looking to work with that person to go through. So, and sometimes we do it when the complaint is made. Sometimes we we'll schedule another time to do that. But I will ask for what happened, what was said, where were you, who was around. So kind of like a reporter gets the who, what, when, where of each situation. That's what I start to collect, because what I'm looking for is I'm looking for additional people that I can ask to say, did you observe this? What did you see? And so I'm collecting information so I can start my investigation. I always reassure the person that this is only people that need to know will know this. I do have to tell my boss typically about it.
I'm really glad to hear you say
Yeah.
that that's one of the steps, because I think that for employees, they feel very vulnerable during that process.
sure.
And,
Yeah.
they're concerned about retaliation, and that often prevents them from reporting.
Yes, and so part of that reassurance is to say, that is, retaliation is not tolerated, but it will be a little uncomfortable while I go through the investigative process. I mean, because that person knows I'm going to be talking to their coworkers about a situation if they've seen something, and then I try to collect more information before I talk to the person that was accused. And then with the person that was accused, I go through the same thing. Take me through all of these scenarios and get their side of the story too, because I think it's important. It's like I'm looking to get everybody's truth on the table, right? And then from that, so once I've talked to everybody and done my fact checking on everyone's information, like for example, in a texting situation, I had her take screenshots of the texts and send them to me, so I had those. I mean, that's the type of facts that I was collecting.
Do you have, so if someone is preparing to come to HR and report it, do you have any specific tips outside of what you have said that you're going to be collecting? Like, what can they do? What should they keep track of before they come to you? Do you have any? Yeah.
What's helpful is dates and places and times. I mean, and to the extent you can remember an exact quote, that is helpful, or your recollection of what was said, right? I mean, as best you can. But I wouldn't let that keep you from coming forward to make, to bring something up, because that's part of my job, is to walk you through it and have you remember it, have you pull up your calendar, think through what happened. So part of my job then is to kind of help you give me the information I need, right? It's a collaborative process, for sure.
I asked that question
Yeah.
partially because if anyone listening or anyone in this room gets to a point where they feel like they might be getting into that situation, but they aren't ready to report it yet, what can they start doing in that process to make sure that they are prepared? And it looks like you have something to add.
Tell the person to stop behavior. That's really important. So making sure as much as you can, helping the person understand that the behavior is unwelcome. Because that's the boundary that we're wanting to cross. In that text message situation, to me, it started off welcome, and that's fine as long as it wasn't like a boss subordinate employee situation, but then it moved into unwelcome. And as soon as she flagged for him, this is no longer what I want, he should have stopped the behavior. So I think that is a really important thing. And then if it keeps going, definitely phone a friend.
Yeah,
Ask for help.
And to build on that, I mean, if you are comfortable saying that, say it. At the same time, if you're not, that is oftentimes where HR, we are coming in to help with that message. If it's something, for whatever reason, you feel uncomfortable saying that yourself. I've done a lot of coaching with people to say, okay, is this, do you want to talk to them and say it's unwelcome or not? And I think that's one of the options I often walk through with people on what do you say, how do you say it, where do you say it?
It's never occurred to me, though, that the person, once they come to HR with this, that HR could help them deliver that message or say, here are the tools you need to deliver that message yourself if you would like to.
If they want to.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
If-
not
if
required.
they want to. If they
That's
want
not
to.
required at all.
Yeah.
And oftentimes by the time it gets to me, it's kind of gone beyond, like you're saying, it's kind of gone beyond something people feel comfortable resolving for themselves.
And Julie, I think you are an exceptional HR person too.
Oh, well,
So I think not all HR people necessarily have the same approach and skill set. So I just want to give you gold stars for that.
Thank you. Thank you. The other thing I'll do is I'll pull, you mentioned in your employment law message about handbooks and policies and getting signatures on policies. That's the other thing that I'll go do is I'll go dive into the files and I'll start pulling out handbook acknowledgments, copies of our policies, all of those things, because I always want to kind of double check the training that people do every year. Did that person get training? So, I'm pulling all those things because it helps with the resolution process. So,
Kami, do you have anything to add that you see happening in the background as well? Because you have a different perspective than Julie.
I think Julie really summarized it very beautifully. The one thing I see is disconnect between employees and HR often is that I think the employees want to know what the resolution is. And sometimes you won't always know, unfortunately.
Oh my
And
gosh,
it's just
I
having
did
to
not
sit
think
with
about that. That would drive me absolutely nuts. I have a very, well, my husband calls it an overactive sense of justice. And I think that would be very, very difficult for me. How do you handle that situation?
I think the way I encourage employers to do it is to let the employee know there has been a resolution, but they might not know the details of it. And if there is any retaliation, come forward. We need to hear about that as well. If the issue hasn't resolved, come forward. We need to hear about that.
and that's exactly my experience with people. And that is the most, I think, emotional part is that all I can say to someone is it's been addressed.
Right.
You have to, it's been addressed. That is often the resolution. Sometimes, though, it's been addressed because the person's no longer with the company. Okay, so there are sometimes.
There's a hint.
There is that does happen. So again, but that does, sometimes what happened, but not always. Not always.
So you touched on retaliation, which we're going to get into a little bit in a second, but just so everyone at home knows, we have a slide showing a piece of data. 78.2% of sexual harassment charges were filed by women. I think it's important, and Kami, I'll have you talk a little bit about this, to recognize that sexual harassment happens not just to women.
Right, yes.
And I know I think you had some other thoughts on, you've seen it happen a lot more across the board. For us, most of the stories that I hear have been from women, and I'm assuming that both of you have had experience with it involving other genders and other sexual orientations. So if you can just touch on that a little bit.
Sure. So the federal law and many states' laws prohibit discrimination based on sex. That's the term of art that the laws use. Oftentimes that will include gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation. So I think it's important for us to think about when we're thinking about sexual harassment that is inclusive of those identities as well. And then obviously folks of all genders can experience harassment. It can be same gender same genders are involved, different genders are involved, the power dynamics can flex. I think as the statistics show, the vast majority of folks that are the targets and then reporters of this are women, but I like folks to think about it more broadly if I'm given the opportunity.
I mean, that's over 20% that is not filed by women. So I mean, that to me is a very significant number,
Yeah.
not just
And-
on the fringes.
Well, and I would say, I think sexual harassment is as much, or any type of harassment or discrimination is as much about power as it is sex. And so, we do live in a world that generally most leaders are male, but we are seeing progress with leaders being female. So that sometimes I think can influence these types of situations as well.
Absolutely. And then the next slide, between 2018 and 2021, the EEOC received over 27,000 charges alleging sexual harassment, and 43.5% of those included allegations of retaliation.
Which is
So-
one of the things that I think a lot of women are scared about when reporting sexual harassment, because the bottom line is we all want it to stop. Nobody wants to have to manage it or deal with it, but oftentimes we're scared it's going to impact our careers, and it'll happen in a way that is not so obvious, right? So it's like you report it, you get fired, but it may come out in terms of poor performance evaluations or not getting promoted when you are deserving of a promotion. So we definitely want to talk about retaliation, and
And I think that there's something that this slide shows in the data that's not there, which is, we're looking at 27,000 charges, of which 43.5 included allegations of retaliation. You're much less likely to actually push forward with a charge if you are worried about retaliation. So I suspect that the number of actual allegations of retaliation is much higher than this, because those are the ones that are less likely to get reported.
yeah, I would think so too.
Yeah.
So Kami, even with laws in place, many women don't report because they fear backlash. What protections really exist against retaliation, and how often do they really work in practice?
So we talked about the different kinds of claims under Title VII and state law, the quid pro quo, hostile work environment. But retaliation is another claim basically under the law, that if an employer has retaliated against somebody because they have participated in bringing their rights forward under these laws, that can give rise to a claim or legal liability. And I think it's important, to me, this is where training is incredibly important, and really good partnership with our HR teams is incredibly important, because when somebody comes forward, the next, after we gather the thoughts, the next statement is you should not experience any retaliation for having participated in this process. As a lawyer, I always have to say, if it was in good faith, because unfortunately there are occasional, folks who do these things for less than good faith reasons. But if, you do it in good faith, you're participating in the process, the law protects that sort of behavior. And, I think in practice, again, will this actually play out? Will people be protected from retaliation? Yes, if they have good training and strategies in place to help prevent it. That's part of why the confidentiality is so important, that we don't need others in the organization to hear about these things to create this environment where potential retaliation could occur. So I think they're actually very robust protections under the law that I would hope gives us all some comfort, and that a lot of employers, once they understand, can do a good job of enforcing.
Yeah.
And you had also mentioned that sometimes employer policies are more strict than the law. And that's something to keep in mind, is if you are working, if you were working somewhere rather than being the employer, be aware of what your employer's policies are. That can go a really long way toward helping the situation. And if you are an employer, make sure you have a robust policy. And I don't know if you recommend it being more stringent than the law or not, but you do see that a lot, right?
Yeah, it depends on the kind of culture. So some organizations definitely want to have a culture that is clearly explaining what good behavior looks like. Other organizations don't prefer that, right? But as long as we're all following the law, that's great. But yeah, I think a policy regardless is highly recommended.
And just to build a little bit on this, on the bigger picture here, is that Someone who is intentionally or even unintentionally making someone uncomfortable is demonstrating a lack of empathy and very poor judgment. I mean, when you just kind of take the big picture on this. So those people that exhibit regular poor judgment, they're often going to exhibit poor judgment with retaliation as well.
Oh, that's
so I
an
mean, I look
excellent
at
point.
this, and it's like, and things that get to the level of the EEOC that you've got outlined here, those are often the worst of the worst. Those are the things that were difficult or nearly impossible to resolve at the employer level. So these are the ones that were really, oftentimes, I don't know, I mean, you've had probably more experience with that than I have, Kami, but it's like, the things that I saw go that far were ones where there was very extreme situations and emotion and a lot going on. And again, you're dealing with people with poor judgment. And as an HR person, if they exhibit poor judgment in this area, they're going to exhibit poor judgment in another area. and so it's like people kind of dig their own holes if they really are culpable and affecting others in this way. Sexual harassment or not, generally.
So talking about policies, and I know this wasn't one of the initial questions that I asked you guys, but I'm wondering if you have any specific examples of the policies and like the gap that exists and what some of those policies might be that employers would put in place that are more stringent than the ones that the law puts in place.
Sure. So to me, there's codes of conduct, which are really helpful. And a code of conduct can have, it's up to the employer to set the expectations of how we'll treat one another within our organization. So a code of conduct could set the expectation that if you're perpetually disrespectful, we may take action, right? That's not going to meet severe and pervasive under the law. Perpetual disrespect could get you booted out of our organization, right? So, or just, there's lots of different layers of specific behaviors that we can put into policies that may not, again, give rise to the level of the law, but sets the expectation about what kind of behaviors are expected.
And I love that that's a code of conduct. That's a proactive way to change the culture so that it never gets to the point where you have something that has gone from uncomfortable to actionable. You're saying, here's how we expect you to treat each other.
And one thought about that is, a lot of folks will say, what I want is respect. We need to have mutual respect. Well, I always ask folks to sort of double click on, what do we mean by respect? What are the actual behaviors that I can observe either from listening or seeing that I know I'm feeling respected? And having a robust conversation about that so that we're aligning on what respect looks like for our organization. Because respect is culturally bound. And to assume that you and I have a shared understanding of respect looks like just take somebody out of the south of the United States and somebody out of New York and see if they have the shared understanding of what respect looks like.
I think that's why Aretha Franklin actually sang that song, R-E-S-P-E-C-T, find out what it means to me. That's so good. That's absolutely wonderful.
That's really good.
Julie, we have a question for you.
Oh, yes.
There is a widespread belief that HR protects the company, not the employee. And I want to ask our audience to raise their hands. Is this something that you've felt? Yeah, we've got
Don't be shy if you really feel this way.
about half the people or so are saying yes. So what do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is our paychecks do come from the company, right? I mean, that is true. And our job is to certainly protect the company from legal action wherever we can. But as I said, my beliefs are around if someone's just affecting other people, I'm not sure I want them at the company either, right? I mean, it's like I don't want anyone to be treated that way either. I mean, the ultimate goal of human resources, really, in my opinion, is making sure that everybody feels like they can contribute their best and be their best at work and be productive and be, you have that fair consideration for the future. I mean, you think about all the things that we all want out of our lives, our careers, and how important that is to all of us. I want that for everyone, and that really is at its core what HR is all about. Certainly there are people in HR, I mean, there's a wide, just like any other profession, there's a wide continuum of how people operate, how they view HR, and how they view their role. And, my experience has been, though, I want to make sure, I don't want you to leave because you're being treated in a way that makes you feel uncomfortable. I don't want you to leave. I don't want you to feel like that's the only answer. I don't want that for anyone. And so, again, it takes a, I would say go to the HR person you feel most comfortable with. There's, if you're in a larger organization and there's a couple choices, go to the person that makes you feel the most comfortable to have that conversation, because it's important to have the conversation. Because unfortunately, the hard truth is that if you don't take that step to say, this person has crossed this line with me, whatever that is, it's probably happening to someone else, and it'll probably happen again. So, certainly I respect anyone's choice if it just is too hard to take that step. I respect that. But at the same time, my request would be consider the others that affects as well.
Which is bringing additional depth to the answers on that initial word cloud when somebody talked about empathy and somebody talked about it being their responsibility. I interpreted that as if they saw it happening, they would have empathy and they would consider it their responsibility. But you're reminding me here that if it happens to them and they don't report it, are they acting with empathy and responsibility to other people who might end up in the same situation?
And one of the words on that word cloud was protective. And that really jumped out of the word cloud at me, because you also, we can watch out for each other as well. And if you're concerned about what you're seeing, what a friend's experiencing, it is entirely okay to go to a colleague and say, I saw that interaction. Are you okay? Is that okay? It's like, so it's not just on the person that it's happening to report an experience, but as a friend, as a observer, as a bystander, you can report as well. And I even had there are some great feminist leaders, male leaders in organizations, and I've had the privilege of working for several, and I actually had one senior leader pull me aside and say, hey, I'm observing something going on with those two. I'm not sure. It looked a little uncomfortable. It's going to be weird if it comes from me. Can you go ask? Because we're in HR, right? So we're putting our heads together on how to get involved. So, and because he just felt he was like, I'm not sure I want to be the one to go ask that question. And it's like, so I was the one that went and checked out the situation. So again, we can watch out for each other as well.
So it is sounding to me, and I'm just going to push you a little bit harder on this one. It is sounding to me like you're saying, yes, we are there to protect the employer. That's where our paycheck comes from. That's our job. However, protecting our employees is good for the employer.
It's good for the business.
Yeah.
And so part of protecting the business is making the business a great place for people to work.
Well, and one of the things that we were discussing before as we were preparing, and Kami was mentioning, and maybe you as well, is that it costs money to have sexual harassment allegations. And can you elaborate on all of the ways that it is costly to an organization?
Sure, and just to me, employers or the HR team is there definitely to protect the company. Like, that's a vital role. And identifying these bad actors who are employees is part of the role. So I don't think we want an HR team that's going to protect the bad actors. I just have to say that out loud. But yeah, there are lots of costs associated with this. So it's obviously the costs associated with, having to spend attorneys' fees to respond to charges of discrimination, to engage attorneys to do investigations, to defend lawsuits that are related to this. But there's also the costs associated with taking time away from the workforce. You could be spending all these hours focused on being productive, and instead you have to turn your attention to address these kinds of problematic behaviors. And then there's the human cost, right, to the person, the psychological cost for having to deal with this sort of work or exposure in the workplace. So I think there's a lot of different kinds of costs.
Yeah, and it makes it really difficult to focus if you're going through this.
This ends part 1. Please come back on January 14th for part 2. the conclusion of our first conversation on sexual harassment in the workplace, recorded live at the AFWA Women Who Count Conference in October 2025.
We'd like to ask listeners to follow our She Counts podcast LinkedIn page and to join in on the conversation by sharing under the episode Sex in the Workplace, Changing the Culture, Not Just the Policy, your tips for creating a culture where women feel safe speaking up and reporting unwelcome sexual behavior.
Thanks for being here with us on She Counts, the Real Talk podcast for women in accounting.
If something in today's episode hit home for you, well, good, because that's exactly why we're doing this.
So you feel seen, heard, and especially important with this topic, never alone.
Remember that you can get CPE credit for listening at earmark.app. Links to that, as well as how to learn more about our sponsors' solutions and any other resource will be in the show notes.
And please subscribe, as well as leaving us a review because it helps other people find the podcast. We'd love it if you'd share with other women in accounting who need to hear it too.
Many thanks again to our amazing guests, Julie Thiel and Kami Hoskins, whose expertise is absolutely invaluable. You'll be hearing more from them in part 2.
We'll see everyone in 2 weeks.